Hi class, today we're going to be reading The Voyage of the James Caird from the Endurance by Caroline Alexander. And you're going to find this text on page 178 of your textbook. Let's begin. So we're on page 178, and let's first learn about the author, Caroline Alexander. Caroline Alexander was born in 1956 in Florida and has lived in Europe, Africa, and the Caribbean. In her writing, Alexander often combines literary detective work with travel writing. She is also drawn to the reinterpretation of legendary figures, including Achilles, the hero in Homer's Iliad, and Ernest Shackleton, the true-life adventurer whose spectacular failed expedition serves as the subject of Alexander's critically acclaimed book, The Endurance. So now we're going to read The Voyage of the James Caird. So the readings we had before this reading were more about the emotional survival of the people in the readings, but this reading is going to be about physical survival. And how do you endure when you have been stuck in Antarctica for years and you have to take a tiny little lifeboat across the Arctic Ocean to get to an island that's like this little on the map? Hope you find it and endure and survive and make it to that island without losing your way. And then you have to hike across the island to get to the whaling station, and then you can get help, and 3 months later go back and rescue everyone else in your expedition. And that's what this story is about. The larger novel is called The Endurance. We are only going to be reading one chapter from this novel called The Voyage of the James Caird. So let's read the background. Ernest Shackleton was a British explorer famous for his failed attempt to cross Antarctica. His ship Endurance sailed from London in August 1914 and crossed the Antarctic Circle in December. Icebound, the ship drifted for months and finally sank. Encamped on Elephant Island, Shackleton decided that he and 5 others would sail in one of the lifeboats, the James Caird, 800 miles to South Georgia Island, where there was a whaling station. So on August of 1914, Ernest Shackleton decided to make this voyage to try to cross on land, be the first person to cross on land the entire Antarctic continent. But the problem is when they got to Antarctica, there was way more ice than they had expected. It was a lot colder that year than other years prior. And so instead of being able to make it all the way to the shore on Antarctica, they got stuck. So in your packet, it shows this picture. So it tells you that they departed from South Georgia Island in December 1914, and then they started to try to get to Antarctica. They were super close to the shore of Antarctica, but they did not get there and they got trapped. And they started to drift, and the water just took their ship. Even though it was trapped in the ice and they could walk along the ice, they were still moving. And from January to November, they were stuck there in the ice. I mean, that's a lot of months, right? 11 months they were stuck in the ice. And then they had to take, once they were stuck, once their ship sunk, they had to take their lifeboats all the way to this Elephant Island. And there was no satellite navigational systems. There was no radio that they could use. There was absolutely no way for them to get help. And no way anyone even would know that they were stuck, because people knew the expedition was going to take a while. But no one knew that their ship was stuck. And they decided that the only way that we could get help was to take this tiny little lifeboat and sail it from Elephant Island to South Georgia Island across the Arctic Sea. Now, a lifeboat is not meant for this kind of sea crossing. And it was a miracle that this boat did not sink. But not only did they have to take this tiny little lifeboat and have to try to find their way to this tiny little island, that if they missed, they would all be dead. But they also got stuck in a hurricane right before they were about to reach the island. So many things went wrong on this trip, but the amazing thing is 23 people went on this expedition. All 23 people lived. So even though they hit all of these obstacles, every single one of them was able to survive. So we're going to read about the voyage of this boat from Elephant Island to South Georgia Island. And that's what this story is. It is a longer reading. I will probably have to stop it halfway and then do 2 parts like I did for the 7th man. So just be prepared for that. And please be annotating as I annotate. If I mark something in my book, then you should mark it in your book as well. So this is from Henry McNish's diary. He was a member of this voyage to South Georgia Island. Tuesday, 25th, fine west-southwest breeze, running all day, sky overcast. Wednesday, the 26th, west-southwest gale, squally, and cloudy, run 105 miles. So that means they were able to go 105 miles that day. Thursday, 27th, northerly gale, overcast and heavy squalls hove to. Squalls are waves, heavy waves. Friday, 28th, light northwest to west winds, misty high northwest swell. Swell again is waves. Saturday, 29th, fresh west to southwest breeze, squally running high seas. Sunday, 30th, hove to 8 a.m. and put out sea anchor at 3 p.m. Heavy sprays breaking over the boat and freezing solid. Monday, May 1st, southwest gale, laying to sea anchor and mizzen. Tuesday, May 2nd, nothing. So things were going okay at first, but then on the 30th, there was the water was freezing solid on the boat, and then he stopped writing in his diary. The tale of the next 16 days is one of supreme strife amid heavy, The tale of the next 16 days is one of supreme strife amid heaving waters, wrote Shackleton. The crew of the Caird had departed on a day of rare sunshine that made the water sparkle and dance, and the peaks and glacial slopes of Elephant Island glittered with deceptive beauty as they slowly fell away behind the boat. An hour and a half after taking leave of the line of dark figures on the lonely beach, the Caird's crew ran into their old enemy, the pack. The pack is the ice pack. Once again, they entered the eerie landscape of fantastically shaped ancient wrecked bergs. So this is icebergs and ice pack. A channel they had spotted before departure, so that means like an area where there's no ice, because remember, if they hit ice, their ship will sink. From the beach led them through the heaving, strangely rustling pack to open water by nightfall. Even on this first relatively easy day, the Caird shipped water, soaked by spray and soused by breaking waves. So shipped water means water entered the boat. This boat was tiny, by the way. It was a little lifeboat. Barely enough room for 3 people to sleep and 3 other people to move around and take the helm. The crew wore woolen underwear under ordinary cloth trousers, Jaeger sweaters, woolen socks, mitts, and baklavas. Over these, each man had his Burberry overalls and helmet. These, although windproof, were unfortunately not waterproof, Worsley observed. Shackleton hoped to run north for a few days, away from the ice and towards warmer weather, before bearing east and setting a course for South Georgia Island. This was not the nearest landfall. Cape Horn was closer, but the prevailing westerly gales made it the only one feasible. So the gales are winds. So the way that the wind pushed them, they couldn't get to Cape Horn, which was closer, because the wind would have pushed them away from it before they could get there. The men took their first meal under the low canvas deck in a heavy swell, fighting to steady the little Primus stove on which hot food depended. Unable to sit upright, they ate with great difficulty, their chests almost pressed against their stomachs. The staple of their diet was hoosh, a brick of beef protein, lard, which is fat, oatmeal, sugar, and salt, originally intended as sledging rations. So sledging was where they were going to take the dogs and cross Antarctica, the continent. That was their original goal. So this was going to be the rations while they went across Antarctica. So, so they were barely had enough room to sit in the boat, and what they had to eat was pretty nasty. For the transcontinental trek that now lay on the fringe of memory. Mixed with water, hoosh made a thick stew over which coveted nut food could be crumbled. All but Worsley and McCarthy were seasick. After the meal, McNish, Crean, McCarthy, and Vincent crawled into their wet bags and laid down on the hard, shifting ballast of stones, while Worsley and Shackleton shared the first watch. With the Southern Cross shining from the clear, cold sky overhead, they sailed north by the stars. So the boat was just a short hold lifeboat, and they had affixed a sail to it that they had to try to like basically sail with. They would be up here at the helm, and they would try to be like, you know, grabbing the ropes for the sail and try to be steering this boat up here. And it was just covered in canvas. So this part, the part that got all the water to keep out of the boat, was actually just canvas. So they took on a lot of water. Now, one thing that boats need to help them not sink is they need a ballast. And so a ballast could be different things. Some boats have a really long, like long thing that sticks down like this. That's their ballast that keeps them from tipping over. But this boat did not have that. This boat had a bunch of rocks at the bottom. And you would think rocks are bad for a boat because it might make it sink, but it's actually a counterweight to help the boat from tipping over if there was a big wave. It just keeps it from tipping over. Think of the, like those little things you would like punch as a kid that have the weight at the bottom and then it comes right back. Once you try to punch it, you're like, boom, and it's like you blow it up with air and then you punch it and then it pops over and then it comes back again. Well, that's like what the ballast is at the bottom of the boat. It helps the boat. It does tip, but it doesn't tip all the way over because it helps create that counterweight. So underneath, you would have people having to sleep on this wet, stony floor of the boat while the boat is going back and forth and rocking back and forth. And I can't imagine how seasick these people were. So they were seasick. They were taking on water. They were wet constantly. So we're trying to find these physical things that the people of this boat had to endure for 16 days in order to get help. So now we're on paragraph 5. Do you know, I know nothing about boat sailing, Worsley reports Shackleton is saying with a laugh on his first night watch. He continues, all right, boss, I replied. I do. This is my third boat journey. So Shackleton, who's used to sailing these big, huge ships, has never sailed a little boat like this before. And so now he is the captain, having to get them to South Georgia Island without missing the mark. Worsley's report of the conversation was intended as a tribute to Shackleton's courage in undertaking such a dangerous voyage as a land explorer whose seafaring days were behind him. But in fact, it is striking how many of the British polar explorers were experienced sailors. Not only had Shackleton served 20 years in the merchant service, but each member of the James Caird small crew had so many years of experience at sea that expertise was taken for granted. Each man had the assurance that when he went below deck to crawl into his bag, his companions above who worked the sails and tiller knew, even under the unprecedented conditions, exactly what they were doing. So, many years of experience, this helps them survive. Also, courage is another thing that can help them survive. So we're going to be boxing things that are going to help them survive. And we're also going to be underlining things that show it's a dangerous voyage, to show that this is, lots of stuff goes wrong. Paragraph 7. By dawn, the Caird emerged to light the Primus. The Caird had made 45 miles from Elephant Island. By dawn, when Caird, that's one of the members of the group, emerged to light the Primus, the Caird had made 45 miles from Elephant Island. Breakfast was prepared below deck, with the sea breaking over the canvas covering and running down the men's necks. So water was always dripping on them. So they're in the Antarctic, freezing temperatures, and they're constantly wet. In the afternoon, the wind rose to a gale from the west-southwest with a dangerous high cross sea that racked the heavily ballasted boat with a hard, jerky motion. Shackleton divided the crew into 2 watches, with himself, Crean, and McNitch taking one, and Worsley, McCarthy, and Vincent the other, rotating 4-hour shifts. The routine, wrote Worsley, was 3 men in bags deluding themselves that they were sleeping, and 3 men on deck. That is, 1 man steering for an hour, while the other 2 went, when not pumping, bailing, or handling sails, were sitting in our saloon, the biggest part of the boat, where we generally had grub or food. Going below was a dreaded ordeal. The space amid the increasingly waterlogged ballast was only 5 by 7 feet. 5 feet by 7 feet. That is tiny, with 6 men on board. The men had to line up one behind the other and crawl in heavy, wet clothes over the stones and under a low thwart to reach their bags. With the boat rolling and shipping water, entrapment in this narrow space held all the horror of being buried alive. And many times, men who had nodded off awoke to the sickening sensation that they were drowning. So, being below deck was pretty horrid. They had to crawl to reach their bags, and they felt like they were being buried alive or drowning. They felt that way. And they were constantly working. They had to pump water out of the boat. They had to deal with the sails. They had to, we don't have this here yet, but they had to navigate, so try to take measurements of where they were constantly. So, and then they were deluding themselves that they were sleeping. So they had not much sleep, not much room to move, always wet and felt like they were drowning. So that's physical pain, but also mental pain. You have to get past this fear of drowning or this feeling that you're going to be stuck there forever or sink. So let's look at paragraph 9. I'll try not to stop so much because it's so long. Real rest we had none, wrote Shackleton. The worn-out reindeer skin bags were shedding badly, and their bristly hairs appeared everywhere, in the men's clothes, in their food, in their mouths. There was nothing to relieve the long hours of darkness, from 6 at night until 7 in the morning. The boat carried only a makeshift oil lamp and 2 candles, which provided meager, carefully hoarded light. On the first night out, the cries of penguins coming from the dark sea reminded the men of lost souls. On the third day, despite snowy, stormy weather, Worsley snatched the journey's first observation of the sun between patches of racing cloud. Kneeling on a thwart while Vincent and McCarthy strained to brace him in the pitching boat, Worsley managed to fix his sextant and take his snap, the precious almanac and logarithm charts against which the observations were calculated had become dangerously pulpy, the pages sticking together and the numbers blurred. Nonetheless, Worsley's calculations revealed that they had come 128 miles from Elephant Islands. So the only way that they could make sure that they're on the right track was to use a device called a sextant, where they had to use, they had to figure out where the sun was, they had to figure out where the horizon was, and they had to clock the time. And based on where the sun was and where the horizon was and the time, and their, they were supposed to be able to figure out where they were on the map. Crazy math that they had to do, math. So crazy math to navigate. So they have lack of sleep, they are totally wet, totally miserable, super hungry, and now they have to do this crazy hard math in order to figure out where they are. Because if they miss where they're at, if they get off course, then they're dead. They have to find this little island in this sea of water, and if they miss, they're all dead. They were, however, widely off the position he had previously reckoned. So they were already off the position. Navigation is an art, but words fail to give my efforts a correct name. Dead reckoning, or DR, the seaman's calculation of courses and distance, had become a merry jest of guesswork. The procedure was, I peered out from our burrow, precious sextant cuddled under my chest to prevent seas falling on it. Sir Ernest stood by under the canvas with chronometer, pencil, and book. I shouted, stand by, and knelt on the thwart, 2 men holding me on either side. I brought the sun down to where the horizon ought to be, and as the boat leaped frantically upward on the crest of a wave, snapped a good guess at the altitude and yelled, stop! Sir Ernest took the time and I worked out the result. My navigation books had to be half open page by page till the right one was reached, then opened carefully to prevent utter destruction. Steering at night was especially difficult. Under dense skies that allowed no light from moon or stars, the boat charged headlong into the darkness, the men steering by the feel of the wind or the direction of a small pennant attached to the mast. Once or twice each night, the wind direction was verified by compass, lit by a single precious match. And yet navigation was every bit as crucial as keeping the boat upright. The men knew that even a mile off course could result in a missed landfall, and the Caird would be swept into 3,000 miles of ocean. So navigation was crucial to their survival. They had to make sure that they navigated. Navigation was crucial. Crucial. I'm gonna make sure I spelled that right. Oops. So navigation was crucial. No, I definitely spelled it wrong. Oh, duh. Sorry, it's a C. Crucial. Navigation, I think because I was looking at critical and I said it as crucial. So navigation was crucial to their survival. And it was very hard because they needed the sun in order to navigate and to use their sextant. But if they could not see the sun because there were only clouds, then they couldn't figure out where they were. In the afternoon of the third day, the gale backed to the north and then blew continuously to the next 24 hours. The heaving waves were gray, the sky and lowering clouds were gray, and all was obscured with mist. Heavy seas poured over the Caird's port quarter. The canvas decking, sagging under the weight of so much water, threatened to pull loose the short nails McNish had extracted from packing cases. As if to underscore their own vulnerability, a flotsam of ship wreckage drove past them. So flotsam is just something floating in the water. So they saw a piece of a ship wreckage drive past them. We were getting soaked on an average every 3 or 4 minutes, wrote Worsley. This went on day and night. The cold was intense. Particularly hateful was the task of working the pump, which one man had to hold hard against the bottom of the boat with bare hands, a position that could not be endured beyond 5 or 6 minutes at a time. In the afternoon of April 28th, the 5th day, the wind died and the seas settled into the towering swells characteristics of the latitude, the highest, broadest, and longest swells in the world, or waves. As Worsley wrote, so high were the waves that the Caird sails slackened in the artificial calm between wave crests. When the little craft was lifted onto the next hill of water and hurled down an ever-steepening slope. On the following day, a west-southwest gale pitched and rolled the Caird in a high, lumpy sea, but gave an excellent run of 92 miles on the desired northeast course. They'd now come 238 miles from Elephant Island, but not in a straight line, as Worsley observed ruefully. On April 30th, the gale straightened and shifted from the south, blowing off the ice fields behind them. As they knew by the increasing cold, Shackleton wanted to run before the wind, but realizing that the Caird was in danger of being swung broadside to the surging waves or driven headlong into the sea, he reluctantly gave the order to head into the wind and stand by. So they were enduring these swells that were super high. So the little boat would be kind of pitched up and down on these swells. So it would go down and then up and then down and then up. So the large waves were a problem. Also, they're constantly getting water into the hull. And now it's starting to get super cold. So when water gets cold, what does it turn into? Ice. We put out a sea anchor to keep James Caird's head up into the sea. So a sea anchor is where they put down a really big, basically like a piece of cloth that is held underneath the water to help them stay on a certain course. So it keeps them from letting the waves drift their course, and instead the current takes them. So this anchor consisted of a triangular canvas, so it was a triangular shape, canvas bag fastened to the end of the painter. and allowed to stream out from the bows. The drag of the sea anchor counteracted the boat's drift to the lee and held her head into the wind so that she met the sea head on. Up until now, however, much of the Caird was battered. However much icy water she shipped, she had moved forward, slowly, perceptibly closing the distance that lay between them and South Georgia. Now, soaked by bitter spray, the men waited anxiously in the pitching darkness and knew their suffering brought little progress. So with the sea anchored down, they weren't moving very much. So the sea anchor meant they weren't moving very much. So they were moving, but not very far. So that meant that their endurance would have to last even longer. They would not get to land for longer because they were going slower. "Look out abeam," wrote Shackleton. He would see a hollow like a tunnel formed as the crest of a big wave toppled over on the swelling body of water. The spray that broke upon the reeling boat froze almost on impact, and towards the end of the 8th day, the Caird's motion had changed alarmingly. No longer rising with the swell of the sea, she hung laden in the water. Every soaking inch of wood, canvas, and line had frozen solid. Encased in icy armor 15 inches thick, she was sinking like a dead weight. So now the James Caird is covered in ice. So covered in 15 inches of ice. So what are they going to have to do in order to keep this ice from sinking their ship? Their little boat, not ship. What are they going to have to do? Well, they're going to have to start to take the ice off of their little boat. Immediate action had to be taken. While the wind howled and the sea shattered over them, the men took turns crawling across the precariously glassy deck to chip away the ice. So the deck was super slippery, but they had to go on the deck and chip away at the ice. Worsley tried to evoke the unmanageable difficulty and the peril of that climb in the darkness up that fragile, slippery bit of decking. Once as the boat gave a tremendous lurch, I saw Vincent slide right across the ice sheathing of the canvas. Fortunately, he managed to grasp the mast just as he was going overboard. If any one of them had slipped overboard, they would have died, not because they couldn't have been rescued, but because of the freezing cold water. So luckily, not one of them actually fell into the water. So that's another obstacle that they had to face. If they would have fallen in the water, they would have died. 3 times the boat had to be chipped clear. Whether using an axe or a knife, the task required strength, but also delicacy, as the canvas decking had to be protected from damage at all costs. So they had to chip away at the ice, but they had to make sure they did not cut into the canvas decking. Because if they did that, then they had no protection against the ice and the wind and the rain. Flimsy though it was their only shelter. And without it, they could not survive. 2 of the hated sleeping bags were now discarded. They had frozen solid in the night and had previously begun to petrify. Shackleton estimated that they weighed as much as 40 pounds apiece. By these painstaking efforts, the Caird rose incrementally in the water and began to rise and fall again with the movement of the swell. Okay, I'm going to stop here for this video and then I'll continue on. So they finally were able to get the ice. After working day and night and day and night, they were finally able to get the ice off the boat. But that's not the end of their troubles. So we're going to stop here. Please make sure that you start the next video, and I will see you at the next video.